Well, it's so great to talk to you guys so that everyone knows who's who. I thought I might get you each to introduce yourselves and your role on this incredible short. Maybe we'll start with Dave.
Sure. I'm Dave Mullins. I am the writer and director of War is Over, inspired by the music of John and Yoko, and I am the co-founder of Electroleap.
Awesome. Keith.
Hello, I'm Keith Miller, visual effects supervisor at Wētā, and primarily working with our special projects team, which is our real-time focus group in the company.
Thanks, Keith. And Aidan.
Oh, wow. Well, to follow those guys, they sound so professional. Uh, Hey, hi Dave. I didn't catch you before, man. How you doing? You look great.
Thanks. You always look good. I mean, I'm
Oh,
trying to
that's a given.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to
Trying
get
to
to
be yoked.
your
Tell
Yeah.
tell us who you are, Aidan.
I'm I'm Aidan Martin. I am a animation supervisor at Wētā FX, and I was the animation supervisor on War is Over. And yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for doing this for befores and afters. Before we jumped on, I was telling the guys that I rewatched the film and I had another kind of few tears with it. Dave, that emotion in just a short film is just a thing that I'm always amazed about in terms of what short films can do. But tell me about that from your point of view, just bringing that emotion to a thing and keeping it going for a whole production is must be a kind of a tricky thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to kind of the core idea of the film and what we're trying to say. And there's it kind of it's audience. It depends on who you are and how you receive the film. I think people that are, how do I say this? I think it's very easy to watch films and be cynical about, the message or,
Mm,
what the filmmaker is trying to say. And I tend to approach films from a very earnest place, which kind of can put people off sometimes because it's like, oh, eye roll, but I really believe in what we're saying with this film. And, Keith and Aiden and I worked really hard to bring that story to life. Just to speak a little bit about what Wētā does and what Keith and Aiden did on this film and their whole team, without being able to ground the visual storytelling the way that they did, I think that it would have less of an impact. And you can tell a similar story in all sorts of styles. You can do it hand drawn, you can do it with clay and mud and balsa wood and
mm,
still get a response. But there's something very visceral about what they did. From the look of the film that Keith brought to screen and the performances that Aiden brought to screen, without those components, I don't think it hits as hard, no matter how good the story is. And from a story perspective, I, you know, we didn't want to pull any punches with it. And for anybody, I won't do any spoilers for people that haven't seen the film yet. But this John and Yoko wrote a war protest song over Vietnam, and sadly, it's just as relevant as it was today as it was 50 years ago. And we just wanted to take that seriously. We wanted to create believable characters that were in a very rough situation. We wanted to show that in war, the cost is the really true sad cost of it is the loss of life of innocence. And so we really wanted to play that seriously. And at the end of the film, there is a sort of message of hope and peace, which you need, and I think you need if you're talking about war and the cost of it, I think you need to also show that there's the other side of it. So, for some people, they'll eye roll at that. For me, I'm a very earnest person, and I take that seriously. And
mm.
I think the people that feel strongly about it might also connect to that approach.
There's something about the way that as an audience member, I feel you really connect with the characters and the look of the characters, the soldiers, the pigeon, of course, and the environment. And one thing I sort of almost loved the most was that there was this great translation from concepts and production design art to final CG work. That doesn't always happen in animated films. I feel like lately there's been a real push to do that more, with some stylized work in some big feature films. But maybe Keith, coming to you, was that a big challenge here and a big deal for Wētā in terms of just preserving the look that had been established for the film?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, probably most people think more of Wētā as doing, photoreal visual effects than this kind of stylized work. So we've been dabbling in that space in a few little kind of tests and projects. So it wasn't completely foreign to us by any means. And I think, as a visual effects supervisor, that, there's always a process of translation between, the concept art that comes in, whether it is a tentpole VFX kind of thing or something a little bit more a boutique like this. And you have to figure out what to preserve and what needs to kind of get pushed aside or drilled down into and explored a little bit. And I think for me, Dave had said something at the beginning of the project that really stuck with me. He said he wanted it to feel like we were inside of a living, breathing concept painting, a concept painting kind of come to life. And so we knew that there were certain elements of that visual style, that amazing work from Zach Rett's production designer, really just brilliant artist, like very beautiful, like brushwork. And there were those very strong elements that we knew we needed to preserve and kind of carry through, but carrying those through in a way where it becomes a three-dimensional world where you can start to move around and like, how do those brush strokes work? How do the lines work once the camera starts moving around in the world, once the characters start moving? And that really was just a process of exploration, trying things and seeing what works and then just kind of expanding and exploring. And it was quite a fun process to kind of work through with Dave and Zach both.
That also goes for the movement of the characters. I felt Aidan, it was very naturalistic. Because it's animated, it has a certain stylization to it. But how do you feel like you brought that naturalistic movement to, normal characters sitting, but then also the battles and of course the pigeon as well?
Yeah, so we actually, I feel like one of the things that we did early on, which was Keith and I actually went to LA and met up with Dave and Brad at the LEI mocap studio with James Cameron's Avatar setup is, and we actually got a bunch of actors and one main actor in particular. Was that Kevin
Dorman? Kevin Dorman.
Yeah. He thanks, Dave. Yeah, and so Dave spent we spent a week there with Dave and Brad, sort of building some mocap performances around the story points, and it was that was sort of process allowed us to actually shoot some mocap. We did some face capture with the intent that would be something we could build on later on, and in the end, like months and months later, we used some of that motion, we reshot more motion, we scrapped some stuff and hand keyed things, but a lot of it sort of got pushed and pulled and ironed and mushed around, but we definitely started with a kind of a motion capture base, which even for the other things we've worked on, like apes and things, it's like doesn't necessarily have to be perfect ape motion, but if it's moving believably, you just kind of believe it. And we kind of went into this with a similar concept, and there's a lot of things that are mocapped, which we then like Dave would just totally destroy and tear apart and like let's like this pose here, and he's like Dave's just constant like we go into reviews and Dave's just drawing over everything, and like because Dave's obviously a very accomplished animator himself, and it's just like everything's just like gets the Apple pen out and he's like, okay, we're going zip zip zip, and he's just drawing everything frame by frame and like reanimating stuff on the fly, and you're like, okay, Dave, yeah, we can do that. Yes.
I feel like that process was really cool with you, Aidan, because we always had this attitude or this sort of approach from the beginning that the performance capture was like, it was like our blocking, and so my attitude about it going into it, and I think you share this attitude, Aidan, was that, okay, we have the scenes kind of blocked in, and you know, if the animators can use that performance, that's great. So if you want to use the whole thing and then start working from there, if you want to just pull some keys and work from there, if you want to blow it away completely and start from scratch. The thing is like, it was just a springboard really for us to caricature the performances that were there, because Kevin and his team, amazing acting. I mean, they're really great actors. They're great. They also do all the stunts. They're really great. And some of the stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong here at all, Aidan, but you know, some of the stuff like the battle scenes, we were able to use like more of that performance, because you
Sure.
know what Aidan and I wanted to do was really have the animators focusing on the acting, the interior monologue, the caricature, the silhouette, the hand poses, the every little nuance and design, you know, bring design to it, because you know, you get the capture data and it looks real, but what we're doing isn't real, it's animated. And so to bring that
Yeah.
caricature to it, like Aidan's whole team, they just brought all their talent to that to really take it to a place that's more caricatured and
Totally,
tells.
Dave. I think you probably touched on it more. So like in the past, we were definitely like the capture is the capture, and like what we are doing, what Wētā is normally doing, is like honing in to make that as realistic as possible. Whereas for us, the capture was, yeah, as Dave's saying, it's a guide to go the other way to stylize it. So it's exactly that. So we were stepping to the right instead of stepping to the left of the motion capture, but it was still sort of one of the things that we were able to block and get ideas with really quickly, I think, is the best use of it in this case for sure.
Absolutely. The added dimension to this film, and I wondered, Dave, if you'd had much experience with this so far, is using Unreal Engine to make it. And I'm just curious if those real-time workflows were things, Dave, you'd already explored yourself, and how that actually was different than previous work you'd done before.
Yeah, I can speak to that some. I mean, some of it was invisible to me. We treated the you know the back end and the production of the film pretty much like I would treat sort of approach any animated film. I think the tools were probably more um had more of an impact with you guys, with Keith and Aidan and the team at Wētā, the way they were able to work in the Unreal pipeline, but or a real-time pipeline. But one thing that was cool for me was when we were shooting it, you know, I had somebody, I showed it at Pixar, and somebody's like, "Yeah, you haven't worked with actors before. What was that like?" And I was like, "Well, I have been working with actors my whole career. They're called animators." And it's the same conversation, you know, in talking with Kevin Dorman. We would have those same conversations about what's your intent, what, you know, don't act, you know, just think, and everything that we try and do as animators. So the pipeline part of it was, we got on stage and I was working with actual actors, and that was great. I felt like I was at home, and it's very cinematic. And then the thing that was really fun, and probably I had the most exposure to, is when we went back and shot the virtual camera a few days later, and I got to really block out camera. And you know, Wētā and Lightstorm have these amazing tools, all these different things you can do with it, which is just, as a filmmaker, is like a playground. I mean, two examples of that is, so you have your performances already, and you go, okay, give me the playback. And we had like a tracking shot where we had a whip pan, and you know, I was trying to get the whip pan right, and it was like, it's going too fast. And you know, the guy, I forget who was helping us at the time, but he's like, we could just slow down the motion by 50%. I was like, yeah, cool. And then I was able to get the shot, and then now the shot's like kind of jittery, and there's a lot of like noise in it. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of jittery. He's like, oh, we can smooth that out on the fly. And so that was like the first, that's probably my most exposure to it, be able to be cam and then working with the actors. But then once it gets to Wētā, and you know, you guys are using it in a whole nother way, and polishing camera, and you know, Aidan and David Scott were, you know, we had new sequences we had to work out in the third act and in the beginning of the film, and I would do some sketches and hand them over to Aidan and Keith and David, and they would come back with this amazing work that we could just start working from. So it's probably better to talk to you guys, speak to it, because you had more exposure to it, but that was my side of it.
Yeah, I could speak to it a little bit. I mean, I think in terms of direct overlap with Dave, as he said, certainly, exposure to it through the motion capture part of the process. There were also a couple early sessions early on when we were kind of more in a development phase, where we would actually just like crack the engine open and, share a screen and, have a mocked up scene, tumble cameras around, show some lighting changes, exploring some stuff like that. And I think that was actually really useful to help start to kind of find our footing and just explore some visual themes and concepts, in a dynamic workflow like that. As far as the back end and the pipeline goes, we're still kind of straddling two systems to a large degree on this project. All of the animation work is kind of happening outside of our Unreal Engine pipeline and workflow, just because it's still they're breaking ground on the animation side of things in real time, but we've got decades of proprietary tooling that I'm sure Aidan can speak to, that is just established. It's known. The animators are really comfortable in it. So because of that, we're animating, in our traditional kind of Atlas, Gazebo, Maya proprietary pipeline. And then also we're bringing all of that stuff into Unreal, where everything is kind of preserved and built off of downstream. Some of those components have to overlap those things. For example, like, layout components that animation needs to work with, right? Things they need to walk on, things they need to touch, they need to exist in Atlas, and they need to be able to see them and work with them. But we also want to use Unreal for the flexibility of like landscape tooling and things like that for dressing out this world. So we did have a little bit of a fork in the road to some degree. But we tried to do as much as we could in Engine as possible. And we're certainly exploring, animation control rig workflows. We've been testing that on some projects. And I think, in the future world, I would love for all the animation work to fully happen in Engine, where they've got all of that context of everything kind of going on. And I think there's immense value to a process like that once you've got something like that fully integrated. But another decision leaning towards that kind of split was also just the kind of the visual fidelity and the in particular, like with the bakes facial performance, like we still haven't quite pushed super heavily on a real-time facial rig that matches the fidelity of our existing kind of real-time facial systems. So for that reason, we're kind of baking that stuff out. We wanted realistic kind of cloth simulation in the world as well. That was something we talked about with Dave early on. We talked about, we wanted it to be stylized in terms of, textural material, kind of, that is general aesthetic. But we wanted, for the most part, kind of, photoreal lighting, realistic kind of cloth simulation and all of those components. So we would animate traditional workflow, bake all that stuff out through our creature pipeline, and then bring in those geometry caches and everything into Engine. But one last point I'll just add. I mean, I think where we saw tremendous value was just with the iterations and the throughput. When you move to a world where you've got a single lighter who's can pump out 5, 10, 15, 20 shots, every day, because they can light everything in context, and we had it set up where they could kind of scrub in the sequencer through like their whole block of shots in the film, make a lighting change, see it across that run, render it out really easily. I mean, for me as a supervisor, I really had to change the way that I approached supervision and notes and dailies, because the throughput was just so large, like I'd give a note at the beginning of dailies, and that lighter has turned it around, re-rendered it, resubmitted it for review before we're done with the end of dailies, and that's just kind of unheard of in visual effects, obviously. So definitely takes a little bit of a mindset shift in terms of how you look at things and review and prioritize things. but I just see tremendous value in, you know, tools like Unreal Engine to open up this kind of, you know, filmmaking to, you know, the future, really.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, the moment that you were talking about where you were showing those sort of early tests in Engine, like that's where we want to get to. I mean, we want to get to a place when we're shooting the actors on stage that we have lighting, we have you know, sets, we have everything. You know, it takes a lot to build all those assets to get ready for that, and we were moving very fast on this film, so we took a little more streamlined approach to it, but that's the goal, to get there. And you know, in something like a series where you have maybe a lot of assets that you would repeat, I think that that's where you're going to see like a really big boost in productivity, especially like what you're talking about, Keith, with, you know, being able to light so quickly. It's really cool. I mean, Unreal in itself is just such a cool thing, and we're just like it's kind of in the more in the back end right now towards lighting, but it's moving its way up closer to the front of production. And once we get to that sweet spot where we're like, everything's on stage, and you guys are doing that on Avatar. I mean, I saw some of the Avatar shoots, and like there's characters they're walking around over there, and then they're over here and they're on the planet and doing
like you say, it's just about prep, really, right? Like when we did the first capture at LEI was using, you know, the Atlas gazebo pipeline, just because, you know, I think LEI was still like in that transition to an Unreal workflow. But and time thing as well, as Dave says, there just wasn't time to like build all that world out and kind of make it pretty. But all of our follow-up captures at Wētā that we did later, we were using our Unreal based kind of capture pipeline, and because the world had been so developed by that point, the look of the characters, the lighting, and the scenes, we were able to actually leverage all that stuff and have some pretty high fidelity, kind of beautiful visuals right at capture time.
Yeah,
yeah.
awesome.
So even as Keith's saying, like at the and Dave pointed out before, the like that final battle sequence that you might see in the film, like most of that was captured at more of the tail end of production, and that's when we had a set, had lighting, and we were able to, you know, be on our stage in Wellington and actually like have it all lit and seeing it all being captured in real time through the engine. So like, yeah, so like, you know, the tail end, like the last 25% of like, I guess the schedule at that point, like we were doing exactly that. So, but as everyone says, it's all about prep. What happens at the start, you know, you got to get things signed off, and, you know, asset builds and things like that. Those things need to be signed off before you can really commit to those sorts of things.
But even on the VFX side, right? Like, you know, we're seeing a lot of, you know, big visual effects productions that are using Unreal Engine as the ecosystem, you know, in pre-production. You know, like everybody, like the studios are, you know, hosting Perforce setups. You've got previs vendors in there. You've got, you know, costumes and stunts, and everybody's kind of, you know, playing in this sandbox and sharing, and it becomes a very open kind of communal ecosystem where you have visibility on a lot of different components. And those kinds of workflows are super powerful. And I think the more, you know, we see real-time push towards, you know, rendering of, you know, photoreal, you know, visual effects kind of components. And we're seeing it in some places now. Like the more streamlined all that comes from the front end of the pipe to the back end of the pipe, like we're just going to see that value just open up exponentially.
Ian, does that answer your question about Unreal? and like we're like, and there's this cool thing.
I was just going to mention about you know, the tooling side of it. Like for animation, we were kind of blessed that we were Keith's team's really sort of taking the brunt of the tooling side of it, and we are leading more into like Wētā's traditional animation pipeline. But I was going to say, like the tooling just comes along in dribs and drabs sometimes, and a show like this like really helped Wētā propel the tooling into where we want to be with the Unreal space, like in a good direction. Whereas, you know, a couple of years ago, Keith and I were working on one of the early Unreal projects, and like I was like exporting cameras out of Maya and sending the CG suit like a link to the, you know, the MA file, and it was like it was rough. Like, you know, we've come full circle to being like, we actually have a, you know, a tightened up pipeline where we can just use this workflow, plug it into Unreal, and we're off to the races. So we're getting better at it for sure.
Yeah. There was actually, Aidan, one particular side of the animation that I wondered how you know, it did interact with real time and Unreal, which was the outlines or ink lines on the characters. I thought they were really well done. But I'm curious if
Yeah.
that was a comp solution or part of the Unreal
Well,
stuff, or how you came to it.
yeah, so Keith could probably tell you more about that than I can. But it was a kind of a hybrid approach. Like there was very little comp on this in general. But if you really dug deep on the outline work, some of them were built into the model so that we could see some of that in animation, and then
Rose, yeah.
other parts of it, yeah, because like some of it was very specific to the posing and how the characters' faces would read. So we need some of that built into the actual rig. And then other times it would come like into Unreal. It would be like a physical outline in Unreal, and then they also had like I'm drawing on my arm over here. Yeah, like there was also like a
Those are
procedural
called tattoos,
line.
Aidan.
Those are called tattoos. Yeah, I am drawing on my arm. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak
Oh
to it a
yeah,
little
that's
bit.
what that is. Yeah.
I
So
can
there was
speak to
some
it a
sort of
little bit.
procedural thing. But yeah, Keith
Right.
can make that
Yeah.
sound way better than I
There
can.
were kind of three main buckets of lines that all kind of work together, as Aidan says. Yeah, definitely. So there was some that was actually just crafted, you know, in the model, in the puppet. You know, we would build those out. At the time we were kind of building out the geometry of the assets. We would review those in kind of turntables. They were kind of static fixed lines. Obviously the deforming surfaces, they would deform with those characters. So, you know, the ones that are moving around on the face and the cloth, etc. And we get those kind of approved by Dave when we're building out the assets and reviewing turntables. Downstream from there, we had a couple different solutions. So we had kind of like almost like a Fresnel edge kind of procedural line that we could dial in engine in terms of, you know, the quality of that line, the thickness, the noisy breakup on the line. So that was one main component. And then the last one was this kind of procedurally driven solution, actually a Houdini-based solution, where we would take the bakes essentially, run those through a procedural workflow, did some kind of curvature analysis on that stuff, and then it would output basically some dynamic lines, and we would bring that back in as a geometry cache into Engine, and then combine all that stuff together to get the whole shebang.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's what I did say. I just didn't say shebang to make it sound good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shebang.
It's interesting, Dave, because that line work, which, yes, it's interesting because I remember noticing it in certain shots and not others, but I actually like that. But part of it to me feels again like preserving what you must have received in terms of production design and concept and just general art direction.
Yeah, I mean, Max, so Zach Rutz being our production designer and Max Narciso was our character designer. And Max, when he was designing the characters, the intent of the entire thing was as a love letter to traditional animation. And, you know, we all respect traditional animation so much. So we had this, so the style was like, we wanted to be kind of in a painting, but we also wanted to give this sort of kind of a love letter with the line work that Wētā did. And then, you know, on top of it, you know, we were caricaturing the performances like we do in animation. So Max was drawing the characters with those lines in there, and we would, you know, in that review process we were talking about, we say, you know, these are the ones we would want sort of on the interior versus what is sort of an outline, like what Keith was and Aidan was describing. And it was very intentional. And you know, you overdo it and it gets distracting. You don't do it enough, and it's like, man, was that a mistake? And I think that Wētā, you guys, you know, did such a great job at finding that balance of what felt right. I don't know how else to put it, but it was very aesthetically appealing, and it would work from all angles. So there was a lot of work put into that, which was, I think ended up very beautiful on screen.
And maybe just finally, the battle sequence at the end, I just love that kind of, I guess it's an overcranked look. Again, it sort of feels painterly. But Dave, tell me a bit about your intention, you know, what you wanted to do with that battle.
I mean, that kind of goes back to the cinematography of it. You know, it's all very intentional. We had Antonio Riestra as our live action. He's a live action cinematographer that we worked on with early on. And so we would, talked about a lot of the lens kit, how we wanted to do lighting, how we were really trying to compose the shots. And then later working with David Scott, Dave was really great at improving, like making the best version of the shot. And especially when Aidan and Keith and David went on stage later to recapture the third act and some of the first act, there's just a lot of intention put into the cinematography of it. And so my edict from the very beginning was I want the world to be very cold and very flat early on. And so, we tried not to do too many multi-axes moves in the beginning of the film. We wanted everything to feel sort of proscenium and locked off as much as possible. I know the first shot's like, this this big tracking shot that we've got, we'll pull it back, but we tried to keep things kind of centered and just everything feel very cold and mechanical almost in sort of a beautiful way. But then as the game starts coming in, then you start getting more, like the lenses start getting a little bit wider. We start getting a lot of like blended shots where we're cross dissolving between multiple shots. So that whole rig of like coming down and getting all those chess moves work together was I'm not going to say the word nightmare, because it's just hard. It's just really hard
Yeah.
to make all that stuff work. And then as the humanity kind of comes in, it starts to get more buttery, like we start to bring in more saturation, because at the beginning of the film, it was almost completely desaturated. And then when we get to the battle, I was talking to both Antonio and David and Keith and everyone, and it's like really wanted to get that overcrank film speed that you see, probably one of the most famous ones is the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, where there's no motion blur because you're overcranking the film speed. Like explosions are very grainy, everything's very staccato. The film grain comes in pretty heavily because of that, because you're overexposing at such a fast speed and then pulling out extra frames. We did a digital version of that, but that was all very intentional. And the most jarring scene is, well, without giving away too much of the film, is the climax of the film. That's a very emotional moment in the film, and it's so grainy at that point. You're like, oh my God. And so that was all really intentional. And as we resolve out, we start to, again, we start to get in smoother, single multi-axis camera moves. And it's funny, Keith, you'll appreciate this. When we got to Photochem with David Cole, and he saw the work that we had done on the film grain, he's like, next time, just let me do that. I'll do it. I'll take care of it. It's like, yeah, but we wanted it, like we were like, getting like all the chromatic aberrations in the film grain. Like Keith and I were like really geeking out on that, and it was just cool. I mean, it's like, yeah, so all that's very intentional, and to be able to work with artists like Aidan and Keith and the team there, Thelvin was amazing, who was our lighting lead on it. We just had such a good team, and everybody spoke film, and that's the key to it, is like we all just spoke film, and we all just wanted to make the film as best we could.
Amazing. Keith, do you want to talk a bit more about how that overcranked feeling was established in this final sequence?
Yeah, it was as Dave said, there was a very intentional kind of look and process. It was just a process of exploring, combining a number of techniques from, the intensity of the film grain to, the shutter angle on the cameras, paired with, how dynamic those camera moves are, paired with, the saturation and kind of color shifts in the lighting, just making sure all those things kind of worked very cohesively together. The lighting changes in particular through that third act were quite complicated. I think probably most people may not realize like how much thought and consideration went into making sure that was married to the quality of the cinematics in general that Dave was after there. Like that entire transition from that like cold kind of pre-dawn, soldiers running out into the trench, all the way through to that ending kind of golden view back out over the camp with the birds kind of circling in the sky there. And everything kind of flows like, it progresses, across every single shot. There's like key looks we were trying to hit, and then in blocks of shots that are kind of in a particular look, the lighting is constantly transitioning through everything. And whenever you're doing something like that in visual effects or animation like this, it adds a pretty extreme layer of complication to things to actually achieve that goal, make it feel like everything is kind of moving organically, but you're moving through those targets and looks and hitting the right kind of tone and emotional beat all the way across it. And again, pairing all that stuff with the cinematography, quite successful, quite moving that third act, I feel.
And I have to again just give you guys credit, because we could have done a cheap version of that, which would be in DI or color grading, and you would feel it would feel like an effect, and you guys really lit it that way. One of the things I was asking for was, I wanted to shoot right into the sun when the characters are kind of at that emotional moment. And that wasn't an easy thing to do. I remember, Keith, you're like, if we're shooting right into the sun, we're gonna have a hard time lighting it. And it was hard to light, but it ends up being so beautiful because you would do that on a live action shoot, and the way cameras are today, especially with the reds and Aris and everything, there's so much it picks up. And I was just so impressed with the way Keith and his team was able to really hit those really grounded but very challenging, I think, lighting situations, because those are not easy to light. So that's all.
Yeah, our art supervisor Telvin Cabezas did an amazing job kind of architecting a lot of that and driving a lot of those looks. And I think the challenge that Dave was touching on earlier with respect to like shooting in the sun, and we're trying to be as grounded in kind of filmic processes as possible, but we're also a stylized film, so there's going to be cheats where the sun at a certain elevation and the quality and saturation of the atmospherics, we had to kind of decouple those things actually, so we could drive that stuff independently, actually end up kind of cheating the saturation and color of the sky and the quality of the general atmospherics, coupled with a different kind of position of the sun. So it was one of the complexities of that scene.
Like, yeah, I want the sun right here, but I want it this color. You're like, no, when the sun's at this level, the sky's just like, no, I want
we had
the
a lot of
color
conversations
and the sun,
about
and
that.
you're like, you're killing me, Mullins. Like, I think you wanted to reach through the camera, but I mean, again, to your credit, you guys just you got and Felvin, everybody just killed it, like so good.
I love it. Well, I should probably let you guys go, but I just want to one really quick observation. I'm going to just say this to Aidan and to all of you. One of my favorite pieces in the film is a piece of animation, is when the pigeon is sticking out its foot waiting for the next note. I think I seriously love that. It's just a little quirky thing. So just want to give props to Aidan and the animation team, but obviously Dave, that's probably something coming from you as well. Aidan, that's just such a nice little thing that happens in the film,
Oh
right?
man, well, I think we all appreciate that. I think that was either Duyun or it might have been Seb. I think those moments were those guys there, but uh, those are one of those things that we really tried to find the right balance of.
Yeah.
Is she an anthropomorphized intelligent being, or is she an animal that is like mimicking, reward sort of behavior? And it was like, and I think Dave will definitely agree. We went too far both ways, trying to find the balance of like how you make that work. And yeah, like you wanted her to be cute and like really appealing, but you also wanted to, like, I think as Dave mentioned really early on in this interview about the film is about loss of innocence, right? Like she's an innocent in the whole thing, and you want her to be cute and appealing and have some sort of like level of innocence, and she's just like she's going along for the ride, she's having fun, and yeah, she's like, this is what I do, is we're all in this together, and finding those moments of her to have personality, but not be too cartoony, I guess is probably the way to say it. Like you still want it to be a real animal. Yeah.
Yeah, we found that when you're you want to get those emotions across. You want to get the audience to connect to that character. And so you have to have some personality in there. But the more we pushed, like you're saying, to an anthropomorphized place with her, the less believable she came, and the less became, and the less you followed her story, because it's a cartoon, and like what we, what I think Aidan and the animation team did so well was just, we just kept going back to let's ground her, let's make her a pigeon, let's make her a pigeon. And those couple little moments, like her, just the way she interacts with them, and she's on the shoulder and she's watching, like that was about as far as we wanted to go. We didn't want her like watching the moves and like moving a piece or something like that. It wouldn't have the same impact. And we tried a lot of more cartoony things, and every time we just would see it, we were like, this just isn't working. And not that they weren't great performances, they were from the animators. It's just we had to ground it. So I think the more you ground it, those little moments like you're talking about, where she would like offer her leg and like see them, it's a connection point between the soldiers and her. So a little drop of that goes a really long way, and it's like saffron almost. Like you just dump a bunch of it into your rice, it's just too much. So just like a little touch of saffron on that goes so far.
Awesome. Well, on the saffron note, I think we'll end it there, but it's a beautiful film. Thank you guys for going into all that detail on your work behind it. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
You.
Thanks, Ian.